In a bathtub of warm black ink, Daniel Thomas's name was whispered by a cat with one clockwork eye. I scrubbed the porcelain with wire brushes, the bristles rasping against the ink-stained porcelain like 1,000 tiny teeth. The ink smelled like spilled printer toner and old blood, clinging to my fingers as I scraped. Each stroke released a tiny plume of thick, viscous droplets that smelled faintly of sulfur, a sour tang that clung to the back of my throat. The cat, fur frozen stiff with frost, rubbed its icy flank against my ankle. Its single rusted clockwork eye glinted under the flickering fluorescent light. "Daniel," it whispered through the drain, the word bubbling up as if the pipes themselves were speaking. The sound wasn't a meow, it was a wet, choked whisper, like a child drowning in mud. I slammed the drain cover shut with a metallic fund clunk, the sound sharp in the dead silence. The iron ring around my ankle tightened instantly, cold and unyielding, like a vice closing on bone. I felt it bite deeper with each pulse of the piano note, a flat, resonating from the dead speakers in the empty lab, thud-thud, thud. 10 seconds between each strike, a metronome of dread ticking in my skull. I counted them. 1, 2, 3. The cold metal pressing into my skin, the sulfur smell thickening in my nose. The cat's fur, stiff with ice, scraped against my ankle as it pressed closer, its breath a cloud of frost in the frigid air. Its clockwork eye whirred faintly, a tiny grinding sound beneath the piano's thud. The sepia light of the station's single bulb cast long, distorted shadows that seemed to bleed into the walls. I scrubbed harder, the wire brush biting into the porcelain, leaving tiny scratches that looked like spiderwebs. The sulfur smell intensified, sour and cloying, making my eyes water. The piano note struck again, for thud-thee. The iron ring bit deeper, a sharp, precise pain. I could feel the cold metal vibrating against my bone. The cat's whisper rose in pitch, the word Daniel dissolving into something else, something familiar. The drain gurgled, a wet, sucking sound. The piano note thudded, though the sulfur smell choked me. I saw the cat's rusted eye gleam, reflecting the dim light like a tiny broken mirror. The whisper resolved, the wet gurgle of the drain twisting into a voice I hadn't heard in 7 years. It was soft, broken, and impossibly close. "Why didn't you come home?" The words weren't whispered through the drain. They were breathed into my ear, cold as the ice on the cat's fur. The piano note struck again for the day. The iron ring tightened until I felt the metal's edge cut through my skin. I didn't look down. I knew the ring would be bleeding. The sulfur smell was everywhere now, in my mouth and my lungs. The cat's frozen fur brushed my ankle one last time. A final icy caress. The whisper was gone. The drain was silent. Only the piano note remained, for thud-thud. Thud. I stood in the warm black ink, the only sound the slow, relentless thud of the A-flat and the echo of my daughter's voice. The ring was heavier than I remembered. I set it down on the steel table, the iron thudding against the metal like a drumbeat in my skull. The sepia light from the single bulb pooled around it, turning the rust into a shadow of dried blood. I picked up the screwdriver, cold, the kind they used to sell in hardware stores before they stopped making things that lasted. The first seam was already a lie. The ring was seamless, or if it had seams, they were hidden beneath layers of oxidation, buried deep like a wound stitched shut. The piano note struck again for the D. My molars vibrated, a low, wet hum that filled my mouth with the taste of old pennies. I pressed the screwdriver against the ring. S-edge, the tip biting into the metal with a hiss like a snake shedding skin. No give, no crack. Just the slow, steady vibration of the note now syncing with my pulse, my breath, the way my fingers trembled. I wrote it down in the logbook. 5.2 hertz, the same frequency as the piano note, the same frequency as the ring, S pressure against my skin. The ink bled into the paper, spreading like a bruise. The sulfur smell was worse now, thick enough to taste. I licked my lips, and the metal tang coated my tongue. The cat sat on the edge of the table, its rusted eye whirring softly, a sound like a clock running backward. The sepia light caught the gear S-edge, and for a second, I saw it, her hand, small and pale, pressing against the wall like a shadow. I didn't look up. I kept turning the screwdriver. The thermometer shattered against the table with a wet tweck to crack, glass and mercury scattering like broken teeth. The vibration stopped. For 3 seconds it was silent. Then the note returned, softer this time, but still there, still humming in my bones. I flipped to a fresh page in the logbook, the paper stiff with old ink, the edges frayed like burned skin. The cat S-gear. I clicked again, and the shadow of a hand reappeared, longer this time, fingers splayed like a child reaching for something just out of reach. I should have known better. The meow came next, a high, keening wail that split the air like a blade. It wasn't Tita Cat. Sound. It was her sound. The sound of her crying, the sound of the last thing I heard before the door slammed shut. The ring's pressure doubled, the iron biting into my ankle like a vice. The logbook page tore beneath my fingers, the ink bleeding across my palm, warm and sticky. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The cat's mouth stretched into a scream, a sound that wasn't hers, wasn't mine, wasn't anything real. The shadow of the hand pressed harder against the wall, fingers curling into a fist. The piano note thudded again, and this time the vibration was just in my teeth. It was in my chest, in my skull, in the hollow place where she used to be. I saw her then, not in the shadow, not in the cat's eye, but in the way the light bent around the edges of the room, in the way the sulfur smell coiled around my throat like smoke. She was standing in the corner, small and pale, her dress the color of old paper. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She just looked at me, her eyes black and empty, and I knew what came next. The corridor stretched ahead like a wound, its walls frozen in a pale, desaturated sepia that bled into the floorboards. My boots made no sound, as if the station itself had swallowed the noise. The cat followed, its rusted gear, eye whirring in a rhythm that matched the piano note. Thud, 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 thud. Thud, each beat a hammer on my skull. I traced the shadow with my finger, the outline of a small figure curled in the corner, its limbs too thin, its head too large. I didn't blink, I didn't move, I just let the memory of her laugh. The piano note hum in my chest like a trapped bird. The magnifying glass was cold in my hand, the glass warped from years of being buried in the station's forgotten corners. I pressed it against the ring's surface, the metal so old it felt like bone, no inscription, no words. Just the grooves of time, the scars of some forgotten maker. The sulfur smell thickened, like a breath held too long. I inhaled it, let it coat my tongue, let it burn. The note stuttered, futhered, 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 and the frequency climbed. 8.7 hertz. My teeth vibrated, my molars grinding against one another. I tasted blood, though I hadn't bitten my tongue. The ring seeped into my skin, the iron pressing against my flesh like a parasite. I pulled it away, the metal sliding off with a wet thquelch. My hand was red, the skin raw and weeping. I grabbed the scalpel, the blade gleaming in the sepia light. I dragged it across my palm, the cut shallow but deep enough to see the ring's shadow beneath the skin. No wound, no blood. Just the ink from the logbook, black and spreading like a bruise. I pressed the scalpel against the ring again, scraping it off. The metal came away in a thin silver line, and the logbook page beneath my fingers turned sepia, the ink bleeding into the paper like a stain. The cat's meow came next, a sound like a baby crying, like a memory I had buried and forgotten. It echoed through the corridor, the sound stretching and warping, twisting into something that wasn't a meow, wasn't a cry, wasn't anything I could name. I looked down at the logbook page. At the ink blot forming the shape of the ring, I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just watched as the cat stepped into the sepia bleed, its body dissolving into the ink, its rusted gear, I spinning one last time before vanishing entirely. I raised the scalpel, my hand steady. I stabbed the page. The ink blot pulsed, the ring forming again, this time in the ink, this time in the air. The UV lamp hummed to life, its glow an unnatural blue against the sepia of the logbook's pages. I held it close, my breath fogging up the glass as I searched for something. Anything that might explain this madness. The sulfur smell was stronger here, like a warning whispered on decaying leaves. The piano note echoed again, futhered, falling to 3.1 hertz now, each beat resonating in my molars. My teeth vibrated with it, the sound pulsing through me like a heartbeat gone wrong. I could taste it too, metallic and bitter, coating my tongue like oil, slick patterns spreading across skin. The cat's gear, eye sparked, casting eerie shadows on the pages as its rusted mechanism whirred faster. Its whisper came next, a baby crying, mimicking her laugh, triggering a memory I had buried deep. Hudap. The sound echoed through the corridor, stretching and warping until it was no longer a meow but something else, something inhuman. I watched as my daughter's fingerprint appeared on the sepia bleed, the ink spreading like veins beneath the skin of the paper. It pulsed with life, throbbing to the rhythm of that cursed note, a heartbeat syncing with mine, with hers. My hand trembled as I reached out to touch it, the ring burning against my flesh. The cat stepped into the shadow cast by her fingerprint, its body dissolving into ink, its rusted gear. I spinning one last time before vanishing entirely. Its whisper remained. Da-di-di-bug. The voice morphed now, no longer a mimicry but hers truly. The way she used to call me when she needed help with her homework or wanted me to read her favorite bedtime story. I grabbed the scalpel from where it lay on the desk. It felt heavy in my hand, its blade gleaming under the UV lamp. Cold light. The cut was shallow this time, just enough to draw blood, but deep enough for glass shards to embed themselves into my palm. I hissed through clenched teeth at the sting, but there was no pain. Not really. Because what should have been blood turned black instead, ink bleeding from the wound like sepia bleed staining skin. It crawled up my arm in oil, slick patterns, veins forming beneath my flesh as it spread. The cat's whisper grew louder, da-di-di-bug. My heartbeat echoed with hers, the pulse syncing perfectly at 3.1 hertz. I raised the scalpel again, this time plunging its blade into the logbook page where her fingerprints stained the ink. There was no resistance, not even a tear as paper should have, but instead, it felt like I had stabbed through air itself. The cat's whisper turned into laughter, a distorted echo of my daughter's joy. Then silence. The piano note stopped abruptly at 3 hertz, its abrupt absence echoing louder than any sound ever could within this forsaken fortress. My heart continued to beat in time with hers, Dadthawa debug the dark. The cat was gone now, but her voice remained a viral idea whispering through my reality, and so began our new game. The two of us playing tag amidst sepia bleeds and oil, slick patterns. Me chasing shadows while she chased me, her laughter echoing in every corner as I tried desperately to debug the dark. The power switch was a rusted toggle buried in the wall, its handle coated in a thin sheen of what looked like congealed tar. I flicked it upward, the hiss of air escaping from the station, as ductwork like a held breath finally released. The piano note, that cursed 3.1 hertz pulse, abruptly ceased. Silence. Not the kind that exists in the absence of sound, but the kind that presses against your eardrums, like a vacuum slowly sucking the life from your bones. I staggered forward, the ring on my finger burning with a heat that felt foreign, as though it were not metal but something alive. My boots scuffed against the concrete floor, the sound of each step echoing back at me in a way that felt delayed, like the world itself was lagging a half. Second behind my actions, I had to find the source of the code. The ring had led me here, to this Cold War relic buried beneath Antarctica. As ice, and now it was demanding answers. In the server room, the air was thick with the scent of sulfur and something else. Something that tasted like rotting meat and old blood. My throat burned as I inhaled, the smell coagulating into a metallic paste that clung to the inside of my sinuses. I could feel it, the paste spreading like a glue, clogging my airways. The data drive was in a sealed compartment, its surface etched with Cyrillic script and a faded emblem of a hammer and sickle. I pried it open with the scalpel, the blade scraping against the metal like a fingernail on a chalkboard. Inside, a single disk lay waiting, its surface cracked like a spider. S-web. I inserted it into the terminal, and the screen flickered to life. Lines of code scrolled across the screen, each character bleeding into the next like ink on paper. My vision blurred, the world around me fading into sepia, the colors draining from everything as if the universe itself was being erased. The code was not just a program, it was a virus, a living thing that had been written in the language of the dead. The cat's gear, eye shattered with a sound like glass being crushed underfoot. From the broken casing, a child's fingerprint emerged, ink bleeding from the cracks like a wound. I stared at it, my own hand trembling as I reached out. The ring on my finger pulsed, its heat intensifying. I pressed my own fingerprint against the ink, and the ring vanished. The cat's whisper came next, low and intimate, curling around my ears like smoke, asterisk. You understood. I traced the sepia bleed on the blueprints, my fingers leaving smudges like fingerprints of the dead. The color is a cancer, consuming everything it touches. I can see it now, even without looking at the drawings. The world through a lens of decaying film. The piano note speeds up, its rhythm echoing in the floorboards like footsteps from an empty room. 12.3 hertz. It is almost too fast to count now, but my brain insists on keeping pace, ticking over like a metronome wound too tight. The vibrations climb up my legs into my chest, setting my heart racing. I type the error code into the terminal, each keystroke echoing in the silence like a gunshot. The cat appears on my shoulder, its rusted gear, eye whirring softly. It leans close to my ear, its breath hot and smelling of sulfur. Asterisk debug the dark. Asterisk it whispers, its voice a distorted child's cry filtered through wet cement. I reach for the cat, but its fur dissolves into sepia dust at my touch. I am left grasping at empty air, the grains slipping between my fingers like sand in an hourglass. The terminal screen flickers, lines of code scrolling downwards faster and faster, until they blur together into a solid wall of static. I type asterisk, restart. Asterisk into the terminal, each letter glowing with sepia light before fading away. The cat-esque gear, eye shatters with a sound like glass breaking under pressure. From within its casing, a child's fingerprint emerges, ink bleeding from the cracks like a wound. I stare at it, my own hand trembling as I reach out to touch. The screen floods with sepia, the color consuming everything until there is nothing left but white noise and the echo of that cursed piano note. The neural diagnostic hummed, a sickly thrum against the backdrop of the persistent piano note. It wasn't a note anymore, not really. It had thickened, broadened, a chord now, vibrating through the floor, up my legs, rattling in my ribs. The sepia bled further into the diagnostic readouts, obscuring the lines, twisting the data into something unrecognizable. I traced the aberrant patterns with a stylus, the cold metal slick against my palm. The ring on my finger tightened, a subtle pressure against my knuckle, a constant reminder of the encroaching something. It wasn't pain. Not exactly. More like a tightening of the air itself, a compression of the space around me. The smell intensified. Sulfur, yes, but layered with something else, something rotten and sweet. Like overripe fruit left to fester, it clung to the back of my throat, coating my tongue with a greasy film. I tasted iron, a phantom tang. The diagnostic pulsed, spitting out fragmented data, fuddy corrupted code, echoing back at me. It was a parasitic infection, that much was clear. Not biological, not in the conventional sense. Something digital. Something digital. Something the code. The cat sat on the console, its gear eye whirring with a frantic, almost desperate energy. The sepia dust clung to its metallic casing, making it appear ancient, forgotten. I ran a hand over its rusted surface, feeling the cold, unyielding metal beneath the grime. It leaned into my touch, a faint tremor running through its frame. The piano chord resonated deeper, a physical pressure against my skull. "What is it?" I muttered, the words tasting like ash. The cat's whisper, that distorted child's cry filtered through wet cement, resonated not in my ears but into inside my skull. "Dad." The word felt like a physical blow. It echoed, bounced, multiplied within the confines of my mind. "Findad." It wasn't a question, it was an accusation. The diagnostic screen flashed, a cascade of corrupted code blurring into an unreadable mess. The ring on my finger constricted further, a sharp, biting pressure. I felt a tremor in my ankle, a searing heat blooming in the joint. I had to get away from the sound, from the smell, from the feeling of the encroaching darkness. I reached for a wrench, a heavy, industrial tool used for maintaining the station's antiquated machinery. The metal felt cold and reassuring in my grip. I swung it not at anything specific, but at the floor, at the wall, at the oppressive weight of the sound. The wrench connected with a sickening crunch. My ankle twisted, a white-hot lance of pain shooting up my leg. I cried out, a strangled gasp lost in the resonating chord. The pain was a welcome distraction, a tangible sensation in a world dissolving into sepia and static. I stumbled, clutching at the console for support, the wrench clattering to the floor. Blood welled up, a dark, viscous pool mixing with the sepia-tinged ice on the floor. The smell of sulfur intensified, almost suffocating. The piano chord pulsed, a relentless heartbeat of dread. I dragged myself towards the exit, ignoring the searing pain in my ankle. Each movement was an agony, each breath a struggle. The cat watched me, its gear eye gleaming with an unsettling, almost knowing light. The chord swelled, vibrating the very air around me. Then, the whisper again, closer this time. Intimately close. Not a voice, but a thought, a feeling planted directly into my mind. It wasn't the cat's voice anymore, it was something else. Something colder, something more profound. "Why didn't you fix the dark?" The pain in my ankle throbbed, a dull, insistent pulse against the echoing piano chord. It wasn't a clean break, I could feel that. More like a fractured mess, the bone fragments grinding against each other with each strained movement. I leaned against the console, The cold metal a small comfort against the rising tide of nausea. The sulfur smell had coalesced, a tangible weight in my sinuses, crystallizing there, a gritty residue I could almost taste. Crackly, a tiny brittle sound, like frost forming on a window pane. I needed to calibrate the ring, the pressure, the escalating constriction. It wasn't random. It was a measurement, a gauge of something. I shifted my weight, gritting my teeth against the searing pain in my ankle. The diagnostic screen flickered, displaying a chaotic jumble of data, the sepia bleeding further, obscuring what little coherence remained. I needed a baseline. I needed to know what level of pressure corresponded to. What? My fingers, stiff and clumsy, fumbled for a pencil. The graphite left a grey smear on my palm. I scrawled numbers on the wall, the cold metal biting into my skin. The piano chord resonated, a physical vibration in my teeth. It was a frequency. I was certain of it, a repeating pattern embedded within the noise. I wrote it down, a series of numbers that seemed to mock my efforts, a language I could quite decipher. The cat sat on the console, its gear, I whirring with a frantic, almost desperate energy. The whisper came then, that distorted child, husk cry filtered through wet cement. Dad. It wasn't directed at me, not exactly. It was subined within, the chord woven into the fabric of the sound. The code that what it was. The ring wasn't just a pressure gauge. It was a key to understanding. Something. The cat's whisper felt closer this time, a phantom touch against my ear. The sulfur crystals in my sinuses crackled deed again, a sharp, unsettling sound. Then, the shattering, a sharp, brittle freaking that cut through the oppressive chord. The cat's gear, that rusted clockwork mechanism fractured, splintering into a dozen pieces. Beneath the metal shards, something else. A fingerprint. Small, delicate, undeniably human. A child's fingerprint pressed into the metal. A wave of dizziness washed over me. The smell of sulfur intensified, almost choking me. The piano chord pulsed, a relentless heartbeat of dread. The diagnostic screen sputtered, displaying a single, fragmented line of text, iteration 74 *. Without conscious thought, I raised my hand, my fingers trembling. I pressed my own fingerprint onto the metal directly over the child. The metal felt cold, alien against my skin. A faint tremor ran through my arm. The whisper came again, a subtle shift in the chord, a new layer of distortion. Then, silence. The piano chord ceased. The diagnostic screen went dark. The sulfur smell vanished, leaving only the lingering taste of iron on my tongue. The pain in my ankle, while still present, felt muted, distant. I looked down at my hand, expecting to see some visible reaction, some mark left by the contact. But there was nothing. I looked at my ring finger. The ring was gone. The absence was immediate, visceral. It wasn't a lack of weight. It was a void. A hollow space where something essential had been. It felt like a physical wound, a gaping hole in my reality. The air seemed to thin, to vibrate with a silent, expectant hum. I reached for my finger, instinctively, as if to grasp at the vanished metal. The cat, silent now, stared at me with unblinking eyes. Its gear, now a shattered mosaic of metal, reflected the darkness of the station. The whisper returned, not in my ears but in the sudden, terrifying stillness. Now you understand. The numbers swam before my eyes, a jumble of meaningless symbols against the sepia tone screen. Iteration 74. I typed the sequence, each keystroke a hesitant tremor in the frigid air. The metallic foy clack of the keys echoed unnaturally loud in the sudden, suffocating silence. The piano chord, that omnipresent drone that had become the station's heartbeat, simply ceased, no diminuendo, no fading sigh. Just gone. A silence descended, thick and viscous. It wasn't merely the absence of sound, it was a palpable pressure against my eardrums, a physical weight threatening to crush my skull. It screamed, not with a bang but with the slow, agonizing tear of parchment, a rustling that seemed to emanate from the very walls. The dust motes, illuminated by the dying glow of the screen, danced in a frantic ballet, mocking my stillness. The cat's gear, fractured and scattered across the console, reflected the dim light like shards of broken glass. The faint scent of ozone, sharp and metallic, replaced the sulfur, a new layer of discomfort layered upon the existing dread. I braced myself, expecting something, a surge of power, a cascade of error messages, anything to break the oppressive quiet. Instead, a voice, not in my ears, not precisely. It resonated within my skull, a phantom echo layered over the screaming silence. Asterisk, why didn't you debug the dark, Dad? Asterisk, the words weren't spoken with malice, but with a weary resignation that chilled me to the bone. It wasn't the distorted guttural whisper I'd grown accustomed to. It was my daughter's voice, familiar, achingly so. A voice I hadn't heard in too long. The memory of her laughter, bright and clear, slammed into me. A physical blow. The metallic tang in my mouth intensified, a bitter taste of regret. My knees buckled. The cold metal of the console pressed against my cheek as I slumped forward. The diagnostic screen went dark, plunging the room into near total darkness, save for the faint, reflected light from the shattered gear. The shadows seemed to coalesce, to deepen, to press inward. I tried to push myself up, but my limbs felt heavy, unresponsive. A strange rigidity was creeping into my joints, a slow, inexorable petrification. I looked down at my hands. The skin felt taut, stretched thin over bone. The sepia tone was deepening, spreading like a stain. The walls. They weren't walls anymore, they were shifting, solidifying. Not into concrete or metal, but into something cold, hard, and strangely familiar. They were taking shape. The curve of a finger, the arch of a wrist, the smooth, unforgiving surface of the ring. The room was shrinking, the walls closing in, molding themselves around me, compressing me. The air grew thick, heavy, difficult to draw, a pressure built in my chest, a crushing weight that stole my breath. The screaming silence intensified, a deafening roar in my ears then. A touch, a cold, wet pressure against the back of my neck, a tentative lick. I didn't dare turn around. I knew what I would see. The cat, or what remained of it. Its form was indistinct, blurred, a shifting mosaic of metal and shadow. But I felt its presence, a cold, spectral weight against my skin. The pressure continued to build, the walls closing in, the silence screaming. I was becoming part of the ring, assimilated into its cold, unyielding embrace. A final fleeting thought crossed my mind, a realization of the terrible, inescapable truth. The code wasn't a key. It was a seed. The sepia bled from my eyes like ink dissolving in water, staining the corners of my vision with the color of dried blood and forgotten photographs. My fingers traced the wall where it had begun to harden, a slow, viscous shift from cold stone to something cold and unyielding. The ring's shape was forming beneath my palm, its edges sharp against my skin, the metal humming with a vibration I felt in my molars. The sulfur smell had returned, thick as rotting meat, undercut by the ozone tang of the console. I pushed myself up, joints stiffening like rusted hinges, and found the logbook tucked beneath the shattered gear eye. Its pages crackled as I opened them, the paper brittle as dead leaves. The final entry was scrawled in a hand that wasn't mine. Foofy, the loop is the error. The words blurred as the sepia tide surged higher in my vision. A whisper, thin as spider silk, brushed my ear. Dad. Not the cat's voice, my daughter's. My daughter's, the exact cadence she used when she'd stand by my chair, small fingers brushing my wrist. I froze. The sound wasn't in the air. It was inside my skull, a ghost of a memory layered over the screaming silence. The piano note won. The note began to pulse inside my blood, a slow, insistent thrum beneath my ribs. Drip, drip, drip. Of the leaky faucet in the kitchen, the rhythm of her tiny feet on the floorboards. I clenched my teeth against the taste of copper, the metallic sting of blood and regret. The cat's ghost stood where the console had been, a shifting silhouette of shadow and fractured metal. One eye, the clockwork gear, glowed with a sickly amber light. Its breath was cold, damp against my neck like a wet rag through dead loop. The whisper wasn't a question. It was a fact, a verdict. The walls pressed closer, the ring's surface now a perfect, unyielding circle against my chest. I could feel the cold metal seep into my skin, the pressure building like a fist closing around my heart. The air grew thick, each breath a struggle against the weight of the stone, the weight of the truth. My fingers found the keyboard. The metal keys were slick with condensation. I typed the fear start, with a tremor that wasn't fear but exhaustion. Each key clack echoed like a hammer striking stone, the sound sharp and final in the suffocating quiet. The terminal screen flickered, the sepia light flooding the room in a wave, deepening, spreading like a stain on parchment. The walls dissolved into the ring's shape entirely, smooth and cold, molding to my body. The piano note thrummed louder inside my bones, a deep, resonant rhythm that matched the frantic beat of my own slowing heart. The screen dissolved into pure sepia. No text. Just the color of old photographs of forgotten things. The cat's ghost tilted its head, the clockwork gear grinding softly. Its voice, a faint echo of my daughter's, whispered one last time, "Hi, Dad, Loop." The word hung in the air, not a sound, but a realization sinking into the marrow. The ring tightened, a cold kiss against my throat. The last thing I felt was the absence of the piano note. The silence was no longer screaming. It was waiting.